What if the greatest achievements in mountaineering were built on lies, manipulation, and broken rules? What if the heroes standing on top of the world never actually earned their place there? Today, we expose 3 shocking stories that rocked the climbing community to its core. A man who faked his way to national glory, a woman whose charm was as deadly as the mountains she conquered, and a wave of climbers who decided the rules simply did not apply to them. These are the stories the mountain never forgets. Narendra Singh Yadav stood before cameras with a smile that could light up a stadium. Government officials shook his hand. Journalists wrote glowing headlines about the young Indian mountaineer who had conquered the impossible. In 2016, he claimed to have reached the summit of Mount Everest, the roof of the world, the ultimate test of human endurance. He posted photographs that appeared to prove it. There he was, standing triumphantly at the peak, the Indian, flag clutched in his frozen hands, oxygen mask secured, surrounded by endless white. To the average person scrolling through their feed, it looked legitimate. The image radiated success, determination, and national pride. Narendra became a symbol of what India could achieve. He was shortlisted for the Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Award, one of the highest honors a climber could receive in his country. His face appeared in newspapers from Delhi to Mumbai. Schools invited him to speak. His story inspired thousands who dreamed of one day standing where he stood. But something was wrong. Experienced mountaineers studying the photograph noticed details that did not add up. The lighting seemed artificial, as if it had been captured under different conditions than a typical Everest summit. The background appeared oddly flat, lacking the depth and texture that characterized real summit shots. Shadows fell in directions that did not match the sun's position at the time summit. Photos are typically taken. The snow beneath his feet looked strangely uniform, lacking the wind-sculpted patterns that define Everest's peak. And then there was the oxygen mask. It was not connected to anything. No hose, no cylinder, nothing keeping him alive in the death zone, where the air is so thin that every breath is a battle. Any real climber would know that above 8,000 meters, supplemental oxygen is not optional for most people. It is the difference between life and death. Yet there stood Narendra, supposedly at the highest point on Earth, with equipment that would have killed him within minutes if the photograph were genuine. The whispers started small. Forum posts questioning the authenticity. Climbers comparing his image to verified summit photographs from the same date. The more people looked, the worse it got. Digital analysts claimed the image showed signs of manipulation. Elements appeared pasted together from multiple sources. The triumphant hero shot was beginning to look like a very amateur Photoshop job done by someone who thought nobody would look too closely. Then came the testimonies. Fellow climbers from the same expedition stepped forward with a very different version of events. They said Narendra had never made it past Camp 4. According to them, he collapsed from exhaustion and altitude sickness long before any summit attempt was possible. He had turned back, defeated by the mountain like so many others before him. There was no shame in that. Everest humbles even the strongest. But claiming victory you never achieved? That crossed a line nobody was willing to forgive. The investigation that followed exposed a system with cracks wide enough to drive a fraud through. The Nepalese liaison officer who was supposed to verify the climb had apparently never gone up the mountain himself. He signed off on paperwork based on second-hand information, a common practice that suddenly seemed dangerously flawed. The role of liaison officer was meant to ensure accountability, but in reality, many of them stayed comfortably in Kathmandu while relying entirely on reports from expedition leaders who had every incentive to report success. It was a loophole that had existed for years, and in this case, It helped transform a lie into an official government-certified achievement. Questions emerged about the trekking agency that organized the expedition. Some suggested they had provided the altered photograph, or at least turned a blind eye to its creation. There were whispers of money-changing hands to expedite approvals and secure documentation without proper verification. This was not a single man's deception, but a mirror held up to an entire system that prioritized stories over truth and headlines over honesty. If one fraudulent claim could slip through so easily, how many others had done the same? In August 2020, 4 years after the supposed climb, the Indian government did something almost unprecedented. They revoked the Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Award. Officials admitted they had been deceived. They stated publicly that there was no verified evidence supporting his summit claim. For Narendra, this was not just losing a medal. This was losing everything he had built his public identity upon. The media that once celebrated him now tore him apart with equal enthusiasm. The mountaineering community felt betrayed on a fundamental level. These were people who had spent years of their lives training, suffering, and risking death on frozen peaks. Their achievements were earned through blood, frostbite, and sheer force of will. Now every Indian climber found their own accomplishments questioned. Every summit photo was suddenly suspect. One fraudulent claim had cast a shadow over an entire nation's mountaineering legacy. Nepal responded harshly. They stripped Narendra of his summit certification and banned him from climbing in the country for 6 years. For any serious mountaineer, this was a career death sentence. Everest was the ultimate prize, and the door was slammed shut in his face. Back home, he became a punchline, a cautionary tale told in climbing circles about what happens when ambition overtakes integrity. But the story did not end there. After 6 years of silence and shame, Narendra made a decision that surprised everyone. He was going back. In May 2022, with his ban finally lifted, he returned to Nepal with something to prove. This time, every single step would be documented. GPS trackers recorded his position. Certified guides and neutral Sherpas accompanied him with no stake in whether he succeeded or failed. Daily logs were made public. Photographs were time-stamped and cross-verified with satellite weather data. The climb was brutal. The monsoon season brought high winds, equipment shortages, and unpredictable weather that had already turned back dozens of experienced climbers. But Narendra pushed through the suffering. On May 28, 2022, he stood on the summit of Mount Everest for real this time. The documentation was airtight. The Sherpas confirmed it. The photographs matched. There could be no doubt. Yet redemption proved more complicated than reaching the top. There were no celebrations waiting for him, no press tours or flashy headlines. The achievement that should have been triumphant felt clinical, almost hollow. Some called his return courageous, proof that he could accomplish what he once only pretended to. Others saw it as nothing more than an admission of guilt, an attempt to clean up a mess that should never have existed. The summit was his, but the trust he had broken remained shattered at 29,000 feet. For India, the scandal left wounds that healed slowly, if at all. Government departments were forced to overhaul their verification processes. Award committees implemented stricter vetting procedures. Uncomfortable questions surfaced about how many other recipients might be wearing honors they never truly earned. Narendra Singh Yadav may have finally conquered Everest, but his earlier lie continues to follow him like a shadow across the snow. His story forces us to ask what reaching the top really means. Is it about the moment itself, the recognition and glory? Or is it about the journey, the integrity, and the truth behind every frozen step? The mountains of the world have witnessed countless climbers, but few have sparked as much controversy as Chantal Mauduit. She was a woman of contradictions, celebrated as a fearless pioneer by some, and condemned as a manipulative fraud by others. Her story is one of ambition without limits, charm wielded like a weapon, and an ending as quiet as her life was loud. Born in France in the shadow of the Alps, Chantal grew up surrounded by peaks that would shape her destiny. Winter sports filled her childhood, but skiing down groomed slopes was never going to be enough for someone with her particular hunger. She craved something more extreme, more demanding, more intimate with death itself. The silence of high altitudes called to her. The icy blue of glacial shadows and the sound of her own breath echoing against rock and ice became her obsession. By her early 20s, she was climbing routes that made experienced mountaineers nervous. She earned a reputation for both elegance and ruthlessness, moving up faces of ice and stone with a grace that masked an iron determination. At 22, she placed third in a European ice climbing competition, the only woman in the top ranks. It was a declaration of independence that announced her arrival on a much larger stage. She was no longer just a talented local. She was a name, beginning to echo through climbing circles across the continent. Those early victories were not merely trophies to display. They were statements of intent, signals that she would not be limited by convention or expectation. Her ambitions quickly outgrew European peaks. She wanted the biggest mountains on Earth, the ones that killed the strongest men, the ones that demanded everything a person had to give, and then asked for more. The Andes came first, where she tested herself against remote and savage terrain far from the crowded routes of the Alps. It was there she refined her approach and built the physical endurance that would later carry her to the Himalayas. Her true ambitions led her to the Himalayas and the brutal world of 8,000-meter peaks. She wanted to climb them in the purest way possible, what climbers call alpine style. No supplemental oxygen, minimal equipment, no fixed ropes or armies of porters hauling her gear. She sought to face the mountains as equals, woman against nature, with nothing artificial between them. For Chantal, this was not merely a technical preference, but a philosophical statement about what climbing should mean. She summited K2, the savage mountain that kills more climbers per attempt than any other. She conquered Lhotse, Gasherbrum II, and Shishapangma. Each success added to her legend as a female pioneer in a world dominated by men. Magazines featured her face. Sponsors lined up to attach their names to her achievements. She spoke at conferences and inspired countless women who saw in her the proof that gender was a barrier to the highest peaks on Earth. But with fame came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came whispers that would follow her for the rest of her life. At base camps across the Himalayas, climbers began sharing stories about the woman they called the Black Widow. They said she used her considerable charm to manipulate men into carrying her gear, fixing her ropes, and doing the dangerous work of establishing camps. They claimed she contributed little to expeditions while taking all the credit for their success. On an Everest expedition in 1991, tensions surrounding her presence escalated into violence. Two climbers reportedly came to blows over her attention, transforming what should have been a team effort into a destructive rivalry. She had become both muse and menace, a figure who drew people in while leaving chaos in her wake. Around this time, she began a relationship with Thor Kieser, an American climber whose devotion would cost him dearly. Their bond was intense, but came with conditions that seemed designed to benefit only one party. They trained together and planned an ambitious ascent of Mount Fitzroy in Argentina. Just before departure, Chantal told Thor she could not afford her plane ticket. He scrambled to take extra jobs, working himself ragged to cover her costs because he believed in both the climb and in her. It was a pattern that would repeat with disturbing regularity. In Argentina, the climb pushed both of them to their limits. When they failed to reach the summit on their first attempt, Chantal reportedly delivered an ultimatum. If they succeeded on their next try, they could stay together. If not, the relationship was finished. Thor pushed through pain and exhaustion to lead the second attempt, correcting her mistakes as they climbed higher. Then disaster struck. He fell 20 meters and broke his arm, narrowly surviving a tumble that could have killed him. Her response was as cold as the mountain itself. She told him she was climbing again the next morning with someone else. Her parting words cut deeper than any fall. She no longer loved him. Thor returned home shattered and entered therapy. Professionals advised him to stay far away from her, but the pull of Chantal and the mountains proved impossible to resist. When he learned she was planning a K2 expedition in 1992, he joined a Soviet-American team heading to the same peak. What followed on K2 would cement her controversial reputation forever. Chantal had joined a Swiss team, but when that group faltered, she made a fateful decision. Without asking permission, she defected to the Soviet-American expedition that included Thor and his new climbing partner. It was a bold move that angered the Swiss team and raised eyebrows among everyone at base camp. Switching expeditions mid-climb was not unheard of, but doing so without consulting anyone suggested a level of self-interest that disturbed her former teammates. Once again, Thor found himself hauling gear and laying ropes, while Chantal formed a new romantic connection with another member of the team. The pattern was unmistakable now. She would attach herself to capable climbers, benefit from their labor and expertise, then move on when circumstances suited her. Climbers on that expedition spoke of watching her carry almost nothing, while others did the brutal physical labor. She avoided setting up camps and relied heavily on work done by teammates she barely acknowledged. Her pack was feather light, while men around her struggled under crushing loads of equipment needed for survival. Yet when summit day arrived, she stood on top of K2 with all the glory that entailed. For the mountaineering community, her success was impossible to celebrate cleanly. The achievement was real, but the methods cast a long shadow. Despite the growing clouds of criticism, Chantal continued to climb and continued to succeed. Her fame only grew, larger with each summit. She became the face of elite, oxygen-free female mountaineering, a symbol of what women could accomplish in the most hostile environments on Earth. But behind the admiration was resentment that simmered and occasionally boiled over. Climbers accused her of ignoring expedition rules, using shared resources without contributing to their installation, and monopolizing media attention that should have been shared. Her response to critics never wavered. They resent that a woman climbs better than they do, she would say. Jealousy explained everything in her view. She moved through the world with a charisma and defiance that made her impossible to ignore. For every enemy she made, there was a devoted supporter. For every accusation, there was someone willing to defend her. She was a polarizing figure who seemed to thrive on controversy. By 1998, Chantal had set her sights on Dhaulagiri, the seventh highest mountain on Earth. She joined an expedition that included veteran Spanish climber Juanito Oyarzabal. On May 13th, they reached the summit together, adding another 8,000er to her remarkable collection. But that night, at 7,400 meters above sea level, something went wrong. She died in her sleep, reportedly from high-altitude pulmonary edema. There was no dramatic fall, no desperate struggle against the elements, no final words shouted into the wind. She simply stopped breathing in her tent near the top of the world she had devoted her entire existence to conquering. Her body was found the next morning, still in her sleeping bag, as though peacefully frozen in a final embrace with the mountains that had defined her. The woman who had lived so fiercely died without spectacle. The peaks that created her legend claimed her in the quietest way imaginable. Her death sparked debates that continue to this day. Was she a pioneer who shattered barriers, or a pretender who exploited others? A fearless athlete, or a brilliant manipulator who weaponized her charm? Some mourned her as a hero who proved women could compete at the highest levels of mountaineering. Others called her reckless and dangerous to anyone who climbed beside her. What no one could deny was that she changed the game. Chantal Mauduit reached heights most never dream of and left behind a legacy that refuses to fade. She was neither saint nor villain, but something more complicated, strong yet dependent, brilliant yet divisive, fearless yet fatally flawed. The mountains took her in the end, but not before she carved her name into their icy faces forever. Her story reminds us that greatness and controversy often walk hand in hand, and that legends are never simple. While frauds like Narendra and polarizing figures like Chantal made headlines through individual deception or controversy, a different kind of rule-breaking has quietly infected modern mountaineering. Today, cheating on Everest has become an industry unto itself, with climbers employing methods that would have shocked previous generations. From illegal flights to fake permits and experimental drugs, the sacred climb is being corrupted from every angle. In May 2023, American climber Darren Verlogan reached Camp 2 on Everest, perched nearly 6,000 meters above sea level. Most people at that altitude were battling oxygen deprivation, frostbite, and crushing exhaustion. Darren was preparing to fly. He had stuffed a paraglider into his pack and carried it up the mountain without telling anyone his plans. While other climbers focused on survival, he sprinted toward the edge of the camp and launched himself into the frozen sky. He soared over glaciers, crevasses, and the infamous Khumbu icefall that has killed more climbers than any other section of the mountain. Witnesses watched in disbelief as this unauthorized aerial stunt unfolded above their heads. Nobody had heard of anyone attempting a paraglide from that altitude, especially without permission, and especially solo. The footage was spectacular, exactly the kind of content that goes viral and attracts sponsors. Within hours, clips of his flight were spreading across social media platforms, gathering millions of views from people who had never set foot on a mountain. But there was a significant problem. Under Nepalese law, any aerial activity around Everest requires a special aviation permit. Darren had none. He had not just broken mountaineering protocols. He had violated airspace regulations in one of the most tightly controlled climbing zones on the planet. The Everest region is protected by strict rules designed to preserve both safety and the sanctity of the mountain. Unauthorized flights pose risks to rescue helicopters, other climbers, and the delicate ecosystem that exists even at extreme altitude. Officials called his stunt reckless and dangerous. The tourism ministry issued a formal warning, stating he would be blacklisted from future expeditions if he ever attempted anything similar. For Darren, the permits and paperwork were beside the point. In a world where every Everest climb looks identical on social media, this was his way to stand out from the crowd. And he certainly achieved that goal, just not in the way he might have hoped. Mountaineering forums erupted with arguments. Some called his flight bold and innovative. Others called it a slap in the face to climbers who risk their lives following the rules. His aerial stunt crossed more than just restricted airspace. It crossed a fundamental line about what climbing is supposed to mean. The helicopter shortcuts have become even more problematic. Climbing Everest is supposed to test endurance through every painful step. The ice falls, the sleepless nights gasping for air at altitude, the weeks of slow acclimatization, all of it forms part of earning the summit. These hardships are not bugs in the system, but features. They weed out those who lack the physical and mental preparation to survive at extreme altitude. But in recent years, wealthy climbers have discovered they can skip the hardest parts entirely by simply flying over them. Private helicopter services have quietly emerged to serve clients who have more money than patience. One of the most controversial cases involved Rel Gilmore, a former professional cyclist from Australia who was no stranger to pushing physical limits. She had competed at elite levels in endurance sports and understood what it meant to suffer for achievement. But on Everest, she pushed ethical limits instead. Reports emerged that she had used helicopter transport to reach higher altitude camps on both Everest and nearby Lhotse without the required route permits. Instead of hiking up from base camp like everyone else, she allegedly rode choppers past the most dangerous and demanding sections of the climb. The Khumbu Icefall, the Western Siddhawam, the sections that have claimed hundreds of lives over the decades, she reportedly bypassed them entirely from the comfort of an aircraft. The outrage from veteran climbers was immediate and fierce. People who had spent weeks suffering through acclimatization and hauling gear saw her actions as betraying everything Everest represents. Sherpas spoke publicly about feeling disrespected, not just personally, but on behalf of the mountain itself and the generations who have guided climbers up its traditional routes. These aerial shortcuts shave days off the expedition, but they also shave away the entire point of the endeavor. Nepal's government launched an investigation, but enforcement remains inconsistent at best. When money and private contracts are involved, many climbers escape consequences entirely. What was once a sacred path defined by suffering and perseverance is being transformed into something that can be purchased rather than earned. For the climbing community, this commercialization represents a threat more dangerous than any avalanche. The permit fraud has reached equally disturbing levels. In 2023, one of the most respected names in modern mountaineering found himself at the center of a scandal that shocked even hardened Everest insiders. Elite Exped, a high-profile guiding company co-founded by celebrity climber Nirmal Nims Purja, was accused of a scheme that seemed almost too brazen to believe. According to Nepalese officials, the company secured permits for Lingtran, a smaller neighboring peak that costs far less than Everest permits, but then allegedly used those documents to make a full-scale ascent of Everest itself. If true, it was one of the most audacious frauds in Himalayan climbing history. The implications were serious on multiple levels. Permits for Everest are strictly controlled and cost tens of thousands of dollars per climber. These fees fund conservation efforts, rescue services, and the infrastructure that makes climbing possible. They also limit the number of people on the mountain at any given time, a crucial safety measure. By climbing the world's highest mountain under documentation for a different peak, they could have bypassed government fees, avoided scrutiny, and jumped ahead of the regulated system that everyone else was following. Elite Exped denied the allegations completely, calling the reports false and unfounded. Nims Purja, famous worldwide for summiting all 14 8,000ers in record time, insisted everything had been done properly and according to regulations. But questions remained unanswered. Why were climbers with Lingtran permits spotted at Everest Base Camp? Why was there no official Everest documentation for their summit? Nepal's tourism ministry opened an investigation, though many suspect internal pressure kept things from progressing too far. In a region where tourism revenue speaks louder than regulations, it is difficult to know how deep the corruption actually runs. For climbers trying to play by the rules, the whole affair felt like a slap in the face from the very people who should be setting standards. Perhaps the most disturbing trend involves climbers hacking their own biology to cheat the mountain's natural defenses. For decades, summiting Everest required weeks or even months of careful preparation. Slow ascents allowed bodies to adapt to thinning air. The human body is not designed to function at extreme altitude, where oxygen levels drop to a third of what exists at sea level. Acclimatization is the process of gradually teaching your lungs, heart, and blood to cope with this hostile environment. It was never optional, but essential for survival. Then a new breed of climbers arrived with technology that promised to bypass nature itself. In recent seasons, elite athletes have reached the summit in under 5 days from sea level. No extended base camp stay, no traditional acclimatization period, just a fast surgical strike on the highest peak on Earth. The speed is breathtaking and, to many observers, deeply troubling. They accomplish this through hypoxic chambers and experimental substances like xenon gas. Before arriving in Nepal, these climbers spend weeks inside specialized altitude tents that simulate conditions at extreme heights. The chambers gradually reduce oxygen levels, forcing the body to produce additional red blood cells in preparation for what lies ahead. Some reportedly use xenon to further stimulate this process, tricking their bodies into thinking they have already been climbing for weeks when they have barely left home. The methods are currently legal, but deeply controversial. Sherpas and veteran mountaineers view these techniques as fundamentally cheating. Everest has always been as much a mental trial as a physical one, earned through enduring every brutal step of the journey. These biological shortcuts feel like cheat codes in a game that was meant to be played the hard way. Even Nepal's tourism ministry has warned that such methods could face future bans, citing concerns not just about fairness, but about safety. The Sherpa community has become increasingly vocal in their opposition to all forms of rule-breaking. For them, Everest is not just a mountain. It is sacred ground where generations have lived and died, guiding climbers through deadly terrain. Their ancestors named these peaks and learned their moods across centuries of living in their shadows. The Sherpas understand the mountain in ways that no foreign climber, no matter how skilled, ever could. As shortcuts, staged summits, and record-chasing stunts have flooded their home, many Sherpas are saying, enough is enough. The disrespect has become too blatant to ignore. Veteran guides have called out what they see as profound disrespect toward both the mountain and the culture that supports every expedition. Without Sherpas, commercial climbing on Everest would be essentially impossible. They fix the ropes that guide climbers through dangerous terrain. They establish camps and stock them with supplies. They carry loads that would crush most Western climbers. They perform rescues at extreme altitude that would be suicide missions for anyone else. And yet increasingly, they watch clients treat the mountain like a theme park attraction rather than a sacred place deserving reverence. Some Sherpas have walked off climbs in protest, refusing to guide clients they believe are cutting corners or treating the summit like a trophy to be purchased rather than earned. Their concerns extend beyond tradition to practical safety. Inexperienced climbers relying on helicopters, drugs, or fake acclimatization endanger everyone around them. If one unfit person collapses in the death zone, the entire team is put at risk, including the Sherpas expected to rescue them. Their message echoes through the climbing community. Everest does not need more broken records. It needs more respect. Proposals for an Everest Code of Ethics have gained traction. Nepal has begun quietly drafting regulations to crack down on illegal helicopter use, fraudulent summit claims, and experimental speed climbing tactics. But enforcement remains loose, and the Sherpas know that until the global climbing community changes its values, real reform will not stick. The mountains have witnessed all of it. The frauds who faked their way to glory, the manipulators who used others to reach the top, the pilots who flew where they should not have flown, the cheaters who hacked their biology to skip the suffering. Everest does not care about social media followers or sponsorship deals or the hunger for viral fame. For every shortcut taken, the mountain keeps score, and it never forgets. What started as a pure test of human endurance has become something more complicated. Money, speed, and ego now compete with respect and integrity for space on those frozen slopes. But for the people who live in the shadow of these peaks, none of it is entertainment. It is survival. It is legacy. It is the difference between honoring the mountains and exploiting them. So, the next time someone brags about conquering Everest in record time, maybe the question worth asking is this: did they really conquer the mountain, or did they just find a way to cheat past its lessons? The peaks stand eternal, indifferent to human ambition and human deception alike. They will still be there long after the frauds are forgotten and the cheaters fade from memory. What matters is not whether you reach the top, but how you got there and what you became along the way.